The humiliation lasted less than 90 seconds, but it detonated a life. It started with a glass placed half an inch too close to the edge of the table. Declan Cross didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't even look angry. That was the worst part. His tone was calm, almost instructional, as if he were correcting a miscalculation on a spreadsheet instead of a human being standing in front of him. "Do you understand how standards work?" he asked, fingers resting neatly beside his cutlery. "Or should I explain them slowly?" The restaurant froze, linen and crystal, low jazz humming uselessly in the background. Nearby diners leaned back in their chairs, instinctively distancing themselves from the radius of his words. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else lifted a phone. The waitress, black, mid-20s, name stitched onto her apron in small blue thread, Iris, stood still, her spine straightened, not in defiance, but in containment. She didn't apologize again. She didn't cry. She didn't rush to fix anything. She simply listened, eyes steady, absorbing each sentence as if she were trained to endure worse. Declan continued, precise and surgical. People mistook his restraint for professionalism. What it really was control. He spoke the way men like him dismantled companies, quietly, thoroughly, without witnesses willing to intervene. By the time he finished, the message was clear. She was small, replaceable, and lucky to be standing where she stood. When he left, he didn't tip. The door closed behind him with a muted thud, and the room exhaled. Conversations restarted in broken fragments. Cutlery clinked again. Someone whispered, "That was brutal." Someone else said, "She should have stood up for herself." No one asked if she was okay. Iris picked up the glass. Her hand didn't shake. In the service corridor, a coworker pressed a phone into her palm. The screen showed Declan's profile from 3 angles. His watch, his voice, the measured cruelty looping again and again. "It's already online," the coworker said. "People are furious." Iris watched herself on the screen, silent, unmoving, reduced to a moment she hadn't chosen. She handed the phone back. "Delete it," she said softly. By the time she clocked out, the clip had crossed platforms. Overnight, strangers named her a symbol, a victim, a cause. By morning, the entire country had seen her face, and his. And if you think this story is about public outrage, you're wrong. That was just the spark. What happened next is what broke him. Stay with me. The internet decided who Iris Coleman was before she ever spoke. They called her strong, called her composed, called her an icon for not reacting. What they didn't see were the mornings that started before sunrise, the ache in her wrists from carrying trays, the quiet calculations she made every day just to stay afloat. Waiting tables wasn't a dream. It was a landing place after life had folded in on itself and never fully unfolded again. At the restaurant, she was invisible by design. Customers looked through her, not at her. Managers spoke over her shoulder. New hires assumed she'd been there forever because women like her always seemed permanent, interchangeable, part of the furniture. When the viral clip faded from the daily news cycle, so did the outrage. The world moved on. Iris didn't have that luxury. She kept showing up. There was a rhythm to her movements, controlled, economical. She wasted nothing, not words, not energy. Her body language stayed neutral, guarded, as if reacting too much would cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. When other servers whispered about the video, she neither confirmed nor denied it was her. Silence was safer than ownership. At home, the apartment was too quiet. No photos on the walls, no clutter, just a folded jacket on a chair that never got used, and a phone that stayed face down most nights. Sometimes, when exhaustion hit just right, Grief surfaced without warning, sharp and breathless, but she swallowed it before it reached her face. Survival had taught her how. Then the test began. A customer accused her of overcharging. Another claimed she'd been rude. A glass shattered near her section and eyes turned instinctively in her direction. She cleaned it without explanation, took responsibility without protest, watched people closely while they underestimated her. She noticed patterns most people missed: who enjoyed power, who hid behind procedure, who panicked when control slipped. When Declan Cross's name surfaced again, this time tied to a foundation initiative partnering with service workers, she felt it before she thought it. A tightening. Not fear. Recognition. She didn't ask to be reassigned. When the offer came to serve as a temporary liaison for the outreach dinners, co-workers warned her in hushed tones. "You don't want to be near him," one said. "He ruins women." Iris nodded. Accepted anyway. What no one understood was this. She wasn't walking toward him for closure, revenge, or justice. She was walking toward the truth, and she had no intention of defending herself when the past finally caught up to her. Declan Cross noticed her because she did not react. Men like him were accustomed to flinches, voices softening, spines straightening, apologies delivered too quickly. Authority usually entered a room before he did, announced by posture alone. Yet when he spoke to her for the first time, crisp and impersonal, Iris didn't adjust herself around his presence. She didn't smile. She didn't harden either. She simply listened, eyes level, as if his tone carried information rather than threat. It irritated him. Their first real exchange was brief, procedural. He corrected her on a minor scheduling detail, expecting either justification or submission. She gave neither. "Noted," she said, and moved on. No explanation, no discomfort. The conversation ended without the familiar aftertaste of dominance, and that unsettled him far more than defiance ever had. Around them, tension thickened. Staff began watching Iris closely. Instructions she gave were questioned, then quietly undone. Emails went unanswered. Meeting notes disappeared. No one confronted her directly. Sabotage rarely announces itself. Declan noticed inefficiencies he couldn't trace back to her, yet somehow her name kept surfacing in complaint-adjacent language. "She's difficult. She disrupts the flow. She's intense." Dangerous words, vague enough to travel, sharp enough to cut. Meanwhile, the dinners grew louder. More eyes, more hierarchy in the room. And something strange happened. The more adults tried to manage the space, asserting order, directing movement, controlling optics, the more chaotic the environment became. Raised voices, fractured attention, stress blooming like heat, except near Iris. Where she stood, things slowed. She didn't correct people publicly, didn't bark instructions. She repeated herself calmly when ignored. She waited when others rushed, and somehow, people mirrored her pace without realizing they were doing it. Conversation softened, movement steadied. Declan watched this with professional suspicion. He began noticing her patterns instead of the problems. How she stood slightly to the side, never at the center. How she addressed conflict without framing anyone as wrong. How she didn't flinch when someone spoke over her, just paused until they finished, then continued exactly where she'd left off. Control without force. The more others pushed against her, the more neutral she became. And that neutrality, unclaimed, unreactive, made certain people nervous. It culminated in a closed-door report slid across Declan's desk by a senior staff member he trusted. "Her presence is destabilizing," the man said carefully. "She's not what she seems." Dangerous again. That night, Declan reviewed footage from the dinners. Not the guests, not the donors, not the children running between tables. He replayed only the moments where Iris stood quietly in the background, and for the first time, He stopped watching everyone else. He watched her. Celeste Rourke arrived the way power often does, fragrant, polished, and already certain of the room's agreement. She was introduced as a benefactor, a connector, a woman whose proximity to Declan predated most of the people now orbiting him. Her smile was practiced, her concern carefully costumed as care. She never addressed Iris directly. Instead, she spoke around her, to managers, to donors, to Declan. "I worry about optics," she said lightly, eyes skimming past Iris as if she were furniture. "Certain presences can confuse messaging." The language was clean, bloodless, but it landed where it was meant to land. At the dinners, guests asked questions while looking through Iris, not at her. They debated labor and dignity in front of the woman coordinating the room, never once acknowledging her authority. When she spoke, some nodded politely, others checked their phones. A few smiled too wide, the way people do when they've already decided you don't belong. The house, once merely tense, turned watchful. Instructions were challenged publicly now. Security double-checked her credentials. Alarms were tested without notice. One night, a display was destroyed in a storage room she'd accessed earlier, the blame hovering without ever settling. The message was clear: you are visible, and you are alone. The escalation came after midnight. An alarm screamed through the building. Glass shattered somewhere down the hall. Security flooded in, weapons low but ready. Iris stood still, heart steady, watching the choreography of force misread a situation it didn't understand. By morning, the incident was framed as negligence. Declan summoned her. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He listed facts, damage, risk, reputation. His tone carried the weight of a man used to consequences landing everywhere but on himself. He expected an explanation, or fear. Iris met his gaze and spoke evenly. "Your sons aren't violent," she said. "They're unprotected." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with respect. Declan didn't respond. He dismissed her with a nod, already turning back to his screens. But the sentence didn't stay in the room. It followed him down the corridor, into the elevator, into the silence of his penthouse, where no one ever contradicted him. And for the first time in years, sleep didn't come easily, because a woman everyone else refused to see had said something he couldn't unhear. The fundraiser was designed to erase a memory: crystal glass, soft lighting, donors who spoke in measured optimism about impact and legacy. Cameras angled carefully, catching only the parts of the house that suggested control. Declan moved through it all with ease, the practiced calm of a man used to rooms bending around him. Reputation, once bruised, was being rehabilitated in real time. Iris kept to the edges. She had flagged the schedule twice. Too many people, too much noise, no breaks built in. The warning was acknowledged and ignored. Optics came first. Comfort could wait. The twins felt it before anyone else did. Their movements grew erratic, attention splintering under the weight of voices and proximity. Adults corrected them constantly, hands guiding shoulders, instructions layered on top of each other, patience thinning by the minute. One twin stiffened. The other mirrored him instinctively, panic echoing panic. Then it broke. A sharp crack cut through the room as a glass sculpture shattered against marble. A scream followed. Then another. Guests recoiled, phones already lifting, chaos blooming exactly where control had been demanded most. Security surged forward. Their presence escalated everything. Commands barked, space invaded. One twin backed into the other, breath hitching, eyes wide. The room held its breath, bracing for something worse. Iris stepped between them. No announcement, no urgency in her movement. Just a body placed deliberately in the path of force, hands open, voice low enough that only the twins could hear. She didn't touch them, didn't command them. She anchored herself and waited. Stillness spread outward like a held note. The twins stopped. Their breathing slowed. Their bodies followed her calm without question, as if they'd been waiting for it. Around them, adults froze, confused by the sudden absence of drama. Celeste's voice cut through first, sharp, controlled. "This is unacceptable," she said, eyes on Declan. "She needs to be removed immediately." The word hung there. Removed. Declan didn't answer. He was watching something else entirely. Watching the twins stand quietly behind Iris. Watching how the room obeyed her presence without understanding why. Later that night, alone, he pulled the security footage. He rewound it once, then again, slower this time. And in the quiet frame-by-frame replay, he saw something he could not unsee. Declan watched the footage long after the house went quiet. The fundraiser's echoes reduced to empty glasses and discarded programs. He slowed the feed until movement became intention. Every time authority entered the frame, security stepping forward, a hand reaching to correct, a voice tightening, the boys' bodies reacted first. Shoulders lifted, jaws clenched, breath shortened. Panic wasn't random. It was summoned. He pulled older files next, reports stamped and restamped, diagnoses that leaned heavily on compliance, discipline, structure. He noticed the edits only because he'd been trained to find risk buried in fine print. Language softened, recommendations narrowed. Anything that suggested flexibility had been trimmed away. The pattern sharpened. Caregivers hadn't failed because they were weak. They'd been overridden. Every instinct to de-escalate had been labeled indulgence. Every pause interpreted as loss of control. The house hadn't been unsafe because of the children. It had been unsafe because of the rules imposed on them. Iris hadn't needed files to see it. When he asked how she knew, she didn't lecture. She pointed to moments. A flinch when a voice dropped. A meltdown timed precisely after a command. "They don't fear consequences," she said evenly. "They fear being erased." It landed heavier than accusation. Celeste arrived unannounced the next morning, polished concern in place, grief curated into something palatable. Declan laid the footage out between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He asked why recommendations had been altered, why caregivers' notes contradicted final summaries, why every solution bent toward obedience. She didn't apologize. She smiled with patience, the kind reserved for people who misunderstand necessity. "Children need control," she said, "especially difficult ones. Love without order is chaos." He felt the room tilt. When Iris spoke, it was quieter than before. "Control isn't love," she said. "It's fear with better branding." Celeste's eyes flicked to her, sharp now. "You're dangerous," she replied, not as an insult but a diagnosis. "You undermine stability. You make people emotional." Declan realized then how easily the word dangerous had been used, how it slid onto anyone who threatened the system without raising their voice. Celeste straightened her coat, already moving past the conversation. "This works," she said, gesturing to the house, the donors, the reputation. "Don't dismantle what's holding." After she left, the silence pressed in. Iris didn't wait for permission. She gathered her notes, methodical, contained. Declan watched her prepare to leave the room, the job, the protection she'd built without being asked. He finally understood the cost of keeping things exactly as they were. And the most unsettling part wasn't the truth itself. It was how reasonable Celeste had sounded while saying control was love. The realization didn't come with relief. It came with weight. Declan moved through the next 48 hours like a man walking through water. Board members called with careful concern. Donors asked questions that sounded supportive but carried sharp edges underneath. Someone leaked a sanitized version of the fundraiser incident. Nothing scandalous, just enough to remind everyone that stability at the top mattered more than truth beneath it. Reputation trembled, and for the first time, Declan understood that he had built his life to protect systems, not people. He had enforced order because order answered back. Children didn't. They reacted, and he had mistaken that reaction for defiance. Iris felt the shift immediately. The house grew tense in a way she recognized. Meetings behind closed doors, voices lowered when she entered, decisions delayed. She didn't ask for explanations. She packed instead, folded clothes with the same care she used when calming the twins, left notes where they'd find them later, not as instructions but as continuity, proof that nothing had been taken from them. The boys sensed it. Their behavior regressed subtly at first, a refusal to eat, sleep disrupted. They watched doorways longer than usual, eyes tracking footsteps that didn't belong to her. When she stepped out of a room, one of them followed without realizing he was doing it. The other waited, rigid, as if movement itself might trigger loss. Declan saw it and did nothing, not because he didn't care, but because the machinery around him demanded time, time to manage perception, time to reassure stakeholders, time to decide whether change was worth the cost. Power had always rewarded hesitation disguised as strategy. Iris didn't wait for his decision. On the third night, she placed her bag by the door before dawn. No confrontation, no announcement. She wrote nothing to him. He would understand soon enough, or not at all. The twins woke to absence. One cried quietly into a pillow, trying not to be heard. The other went still, retreating into the kind of silence adults often mistook for improvement. The house absorbed the change without comment, as it always had when someone left. Declan stood at his office window as the car pulled away. For the first time, the pattern didn't feel efficient. It felt like failure. She left without saying goodbye, and that was the moment he finally understood what staying had cost her and what losing her would cost them all. If this was where you were standing, would you have chosen reputation over responsibility, or broken the pattern before it broke something permanent? Declan found her where she had always been easiest to overlook. Not at home, not online, not waiting. She was back on her feet, double shifts stacked without complaint, apron tied the same careful way, dignity intact in a room that rarely noticed it. When he walked in, the restaurant didn't hush. No phones lifted. No whispers followed him. For once, his presence didn't bend the space. Iris didn't look surprised to see him. He didn't start with money. He knew better now. He asked for time, and when she didn't answer immediately, he stood there and waited, an unfamiliar posture for a man used to decisions snapping into place around him. "I didn't come to ask you to fix anything," he said finally. "I came to ask what it would cost to stop pretending nothing was broken." That earned her attention. They spoke after her shift, words measured, guarded. He offered authority before compensation, real authority, access, the ability to say no without consequence, no PR framing, no quiet erasure when things became inconvenient. Iris listened, then set boundaries with the same calm she'd always carried. She would not soften him. She would not become a symbol. She would walk the moment dignity became negotiable. Something in him shifted, not vanished, not redeemed, but reoriented. Celeste didn't stay quiet. The call came that night, voice silked with warning. Boards didn't like instability. Donors preferred silence over accountability. There were ways to contain this without spectacle, she reminded him. Ways to keep control while appearing contrite. He understood the threat beneath the concern. For the first time, Declan didn't calculate the safest move. He calculated the truest one. The next morning, he stood alone in front of cameras he hadn't curated. No foundation backdrop. No softened language. He named what he'd done without excuses. named harm without qualifiers, acknowledged that power had insulated him from consequences and that insulation had expired. He didn't mention Iris by name. He didn't need to. Those who knew, knew. Back at the restaurant, Iris watched the clip in silence. No smile, no relief, just a long exhale, as if something she'd been carrying finally set itself down. Change hadn't arrived wrapped in romance or certainty, but it had arrived publicly, and for a man who had built his life on control, choosing accountability over protection was the most dangerous move he'd ever made. The question now wasn't whether he could afford to change. It was whether he could survive continuing. Iris never claimed she changed him. She didn't rewrite his instincts or soften the edges that had carried him this far. What she did was simpler and harder. She stayed exactly who she was when power tried to define her otherwise, and in doing so, she forced a reckoning that couldn't be negotiated away. Declan's life didn't resolve into something neat after that. Some donors left quietly. Board members reshuffled with polite distance. Control didn't disappear. It loosened, unevenly, painfully. Accountability, he learned, was not a moment, but a practice. One that cost him sleep, certainty, approval, and still he chose it. Not every day, not perfectly, but visibly enough that the silence around him changed. People spoke more carefully. Power paused before acting. The world didn't applaud, but it watched. Iris returned to her life without ceremony. She didn't take interviews, didn't brand resilience into a message. She kept working, kept protecting her dignity the same way she always had, quietly, deliberately. Some nights, she wondered if staying distant had been easier than forgiving. Other nights, she knew distance was the boundary that made forgiveness unnecessary. They crossed paths again months later, briefly, cordially, without expectation. There was no promise made between them, no future implied, just mutual recognition of what had happened and what had been refused. He had thought breaking her would reaffirm his dominance. Instead, she had become the mirror he couldn't escape, and mirrors don't flatter. They reveal. The lesson sat heavy, but it endured. Power doesn't reveal character, it tests it. Dignity doesn't need volume to be unbreakable, and the people we humiliate are often the ones who understand us with the most terrifying clarity. She didn't stay to save him. She stayed long enough to show him who he already was. The rest was his responsibility. So now the question turns to you. Should dignity matter more than reputation? Would you have stayed or walked away? And after everything he did he truly deserve a second chance?